mentioned, my new Crones of a Feather Paranormal Cozy Mysteries has my protagonist Hazel living in a former funeral home. And the reason I chose to have her living in such a place is because of an experience that Ed and I had last summer. So this is the almost entirely true story of the strange night Ed and I spent in Chicago last summer and the very unexpected aftermath that we experienced from it. So I call this story, Maybe He's a Believer Now. Ed and I were both excited about our accommodations for the night. He was looking forward to sleeping inside the Museum of Post-Punk and Industrial Music in Chicago, surrounded by memorabilia from some of his favorite bands. I was anticipating the spooky adventure of spending an entire night inside a former funeral home. I highly recommend having a friend who turns a funeral home into a museum, then lets you sleep there. The first time we'd visited the museum, I was too distracted by the Nine Inch Nails memorabilia to pay much attention to how the place felt. Or maybe it had felt fine that first time. When we returned for our overnight stay, though, I walked into the museum and was instantly pressed down by the weight of the atmosphere. It was dense, heavy, distracting. The one place that felt normal and comfortable was the bedroom we'd be sleeping in that night. The floor in the room sloped slightly. Underneath the rug and the bed, our host had told us, was the drain. It had been easier to cover it up than to remove it entirely, and the tilted funhouse floor was a constant reminder that the room had once been where bodies were embalmed. Blood and other bodily fluids would have disappeared down the drain, while chemicals were pumped into the decaying flesh of a newly dead customer. We had arrived at the museum in the late afternoon, far too early to hide inside the bedroom. Ed settled onto the floor of the museum to live stream a performance of his music. I could have stayed to listen and to be a supportive wife, but the heaviness persisted. The feeling I realized wasn't coming from the fact that dead bodies used to come in and out of the building on a regular basis. Instead, I got the distinct impression that something, some kind of energy or presence, maybe even several of them, had ridden in on the music memorabilia on display. Musicians aren't known for being sedate. All that energy they pour into their music or sacrifice to their fans at every show. All the alcoholics and drug addicts and narcissists. Maybe some of that had lingered on the things donated to the museum, an energy that demanded attention. I didn't want to stay to find out what was causing the feeling. Instead, I chickened out. I told Ed I was going to take my book to the park a few blocks away to enjoy the fresh air and late afternoon sun. Maybe I should have warned Ed we weren't entirely alone in the old funeral home, but he's always been the skeptic, so I figured there was no need to raise my concerns with him. Instead, I left him there, by himself, blissfully unaware. The intensity of the atmosphere had lessened a bit by the time I returned. We went out, found a little diner around the corner, ate dinner, and came back. Again, the air felt a little lighter. The only spooky moment of the night was brushing my teeth while staring into a giant image of Johnny Rotten from the Sex Pistols, his wild eyes watching me intently. That night, I slept like the dead in the embalming room. I know it's a groan-worthy statement, but it's true. I slept well and woke up the next morning feeling refreshed. Nothing paranormal had happened overnight. We had coffee with our host while I admitted to him that there was, in fact, a ghost haunting the museum. I had filmed a walkthrough of the museum the night before, then posted it on social media. That morning, a friend who did remote viewing told me she had seen a spirit with long, lanky black hair hanging down over intense, dark eyes, staring over my shoulder as I'd filmed myself. My friend's description left no doubt that a former bandmate of our host had stopped by to say hello, but his ghost, I knew, wasn't the one who had caused the heavy feeling. By the time I'd filmed that video, the heaviness had nearly dissipated. The ghost of Paul Raven from Killing Joke hadn't been the one to make me feel so uncomfortable. We thanked our friend for his hospitality, and then it was time to head home. Our house in Tucson was haunted, but it had never felt the way the museum had. We'd hear the occasional footsteps. I'd sometimes smell fresh-baked cinnamon rolls, and the ghost would turn lights off and on to make his presence known. But it was never threatening, never malicious, and the ghost never, ever came inside the bedroom. The night after we'd gotten home from our trip, I woke up and realized there was someone standing in the bedroom doorway, a dark shape against the dark walls. This wasn't our house ghost. This was something different, something dark, something heavy. Maybe it had followed us home from the museum. I wanted to wake Ed up to tell him that someone, something, was in our bedroom, but I couldn't. I was frozen, either from fear or from some supernatural control that left me paralyzed. The person, ghost, entity, whatever it was, moved into the room, gliding along my side of the bed until it stood just inches from my head. My eyes were the only thing I could move, watching the entity's approach but unable to stop whatever was coming. As the thing bent down toward me, its control over me vanished. I sat up, gasping and blinking my eyes. I looked around the room wildly, but all the dark shapes were familiar ones. The nightstands, the bookcase, the rowing machine we never used. The thing that had been bending over me was gone. And I realized maybe it had never been there in the first place. I had only dreamed about waking up to see a ghost, but now I was really and truly awake, and there was nothing looming over me. Beside me, Ed continued sleeping, the sound of his soft breathing calming me. I sat there for a few minutes as the adrenaline slowly leached from my bloodstream and my heart returned to its normal pace. Finally, I laid back down and returned to sleep. The next morning, we had to drive to Phoenix. It was a 1 hour and 45-minute trip. For the first 1 hour and 30 minutes, I didn't mention my strange dream. It was still too fresh in my memory, too scary to talk about. Instead, we listened to a podcast and discussed our plans for the day. I needed to talk about the dream, though, and to share how real it had felt. I needed some reassurance. So finally, tentatively, I said, I had the strangest dream last night. Ed spared me a glance as he was merging into traffic. Confidently, as if he already knew the answer, he asked me, it was about a ghost in our bedroom, wasn't it? Yes, I admitted. How did you know? Because, Ed told me, I had the same dream. The end.